Okay, so let's try to unpack this. There's this feeling, right? Um,
Mm.
like a presence that never quite leaves the room when we talk about the state of the world. It's the persistent, unsettling possibility of, you know, large-scale global conflict. You feel it lurking, always.
You really do. And in moments like the present, with heightened tensions,
Mm.
places like Russia, Ukraine, and then the whole complex backdrop of alliances like NATO, that presence isn't just lurking. It feels, well, stirred up, immediate, very much present. It's not just history repeating. It feels like an active concern right now.
It absolutely is. And it's such a strange human thing, isn't it, to like live constantly the theoretical possibility of just immense destruction. It
Hmm.
feels like it's almost receded into background noise for so many people, something we know is there
Yeah.
intellectually, but maybe don't really confront viscerally in our day-to-day lives. But it is there. How do we even process existing under that shadow?
That's a huge question. And it's exactly what drives this whole exploration, really. It gets us to the core of trying to understand this recurring pattern. Why? Why do human societies keep returning, almost rhythmically, it seems, to conflict? What is it about war that makes it feel so deeply ingrained, almost inevitable in our history?
Right, because it's clear this isn't just about who has the most tanks or who controls a particular bit of land. I mean, those are symptoms maybe, but the roots feel much, much deeper. So our mission here essentially is to dig into those underlying drivers, the forces beneath the surface, you could say, and then maybe look at some of the specific ways today that these old tensions could escalate
Mm.
dramatically on a
Yep.
global scale. Yeah, time to understand this presence a
Yeah.
bit better.
Okay, let's start right there with that fundamental question you just raised. What is it, really, about human nature, or maybe the systems humans build, that makes conflict such a persistent, almost cyclical feature? We see this pattern everywhere, don't we? Across continents, across centuries. The form changes, sure, but it just keeps coming back.
It almost feels like it's woven into the fabric of how humans interact, deep down. When you look at all these different conflicts throughout history, if you dig past the immediate triggers,
Yeah.
you keep hitting the same sort of fundamental forces driving the action again and again.
Yeah, the analysis we've been looking at really points to four key elements, these foundational drivers:
Yes.
power, fear, identity, and survival. And these aren't just abstract ideas for a textbook. They're incredibly powerful motivators. They shape how individuals behave, how groups behave in really profound ways. Think about power, just the relentless chase for it, the struggle to keep it, and that kind of paralyzing fear of losing it.
Right.
And then fear itself, fear of the unknown other, fear of losing what you have, fear of scarcity, fear of just being vulnerable.
By identity.
Identity, exactly, that deep sense of belonging to a we, which is often gets defined, sometimes pretty aggressively, by who they are in opposition.
And maybe underpinning it all. Survival.
Survival, yeah, probably the most primal drive. That instinct to protect yourself, your family, your group from threats, whether those threats are real or just perceived.
So it's not just random chaos,
Yeah.
the way this is framed. It's actually kind of striking. War as almost a form of communication. A really brutal, devastating kind, but communication nonetheless.
Exactly. It's a way to signal something profound. Grievances, maybe,
Mhm.
or asserting boundaries, defending what you see as vital interests when, the other ways have failed, when diplomacy breaks down, when talking stops working. Conflict becomes this extreme, really tragic way of negotiating. But with force, it sends this unmistakable signal, this thing, this issue, this resource, this threat. It's so fundamental to us, to who we are, that we're willing to mobilize, to fight, maybe even to die for it. It's the ultimate terrible way of saying this matters.
And what humans fight over.
Yeah.
This concept of what is owned.
Yeah.
It's made pretty clear this isn't just physical territory, right? We tend to think wars are about land, borders, but it's broader.
Oh, significantly broader. I mean, yes, fights over tangible stuff, land, resources, key infrastructure, those are common. Absolutely. History's full of them, and we see it now. But the idea of what's owned goes way beyond the physical. Humans fight over abstract things, things you can't hold, but they're deeply important to who a group is. Like the idea of the nation itself, its sovereignty, its perceived honor, its place in the world order. They fight over ideologies, competing beliefs about how society should run, political, economic, religious.
Culture, too.
Definitely culture, defending traditions, language, history, a whole way of life that feels like it's being eroded or dominated by someone else.
Yeah.
Even economic systems, access to markets, that can all become something people fight fiercely over.
So it's a fight not just for, say, oil fields, but for the very idea of who we are or how we think the world should be, against anything that challenges that.
Precisely. And these drivers, they feel incredibly primal, don't they? Like really deeply embedded in the human experience. They seem woven right into our social structures. They pop up in different outfits across different eras and cultures. But they're always there, just under the surface, waiting for the right circumstances to activate them. It makes you wonder, can we ever escape them?
And while those basic drives, power, fear, identity, survival, they might be ancient, the ways they could escalate conflict globally today, they've taken on some really distinct kind of chilling modern forms. The analysis points to three major looming threats, three potential pathways that could push us towards, well, a catastrophe on an unimaginable scale.
Yes, these are the current dynamics, the ways those deep human drives are interacting with the 21st century, creating these potential global flashpoints.
The first one discussed is identity-based conflict. And wow, does that feel relevant right now looking around the world?
It really does. The mechanism described here is basically specific groups could be ethnic, religious, national, cultural more. They start to feel existentially threatened. It's not just a political argument over policy or who gets what share of power. It escalates. It becomes a feeling that their very existence, their ability to just be who they are as a group, is fundamentally at risk.
What triggers that really intense existential feeling? Is it just outside pressure or is it more complicated?
It's usually complex, but often it involves these perceived deep challenges to a group's core identity. Maybe it's cultural erosion, a feeling that your traditions, your language, your history are being deliberately undermined or just overwhelmed, sometimes by globalization or a dominant outside culture. Or it could be intense political pressure, feeling marginalized, discriminated against, losing autonomy, or even direct threats to self-determination. When a group feels its basic identity is being dissolved or suppressed or attacked, it triggers a very profound, sometimes desperate reaction.
And the reaction is described as fierce, primal even, tapping right into that survival instinct we talked about.
Absolutely. It takes that individual drive to survive and makes it collective. When the group's identity feels like it's under direct threat, people often react with a kind of ferocity that can just override rational thinking, long-term planning, sometimes even basic self-preservation. It becomes a fight not just for physical safety, but for the survival of the cultural self, the national self, that thing that defines them. And that deep, emotional, existential part makes it incredibly volatile.
So what makes this type of conflict particularly dangerous on a global level? Why does it escalate so badly?
The danger is that these identity conflicts tend to blow up really fast and really intensely because the stakes feel absolute right from the start. It's about the survival of who we are. There's often very little room left for compromise or giving ground. Diplomatic efforts, the kind that rely on negotiating over interests, they really struggle when faced with what feels like an existential threat to identity. It becomes incredibly hard to de-escalate once those deep identity grievances hit boiling point and get framed as survival. The emotional heat just outruns the tools for rational resolution.
Okay, so that's identity as a major flashpoint. The second big threat discussed is resource competition. This feels, well, more tangible, I suppose, tied directly to the physical planet.
It is rooted in very real physical realities. The core cause is simple on the surface, but getting incredibly complex. Natural resources that we need for life, for economies, things like fresh water, energy sources, minerals, farmland, food itself, they're finite. They exist in certain places in certain amounts, and crucially, they're not spread evenly around the world. Some places have lots of one thing, others have desperately little.
And the analysis highlights how climate change isn't just some separate environmental issue here.
Yeah.
It's a massive multiplier for this threat, right?
Precisely. Climate change acts like pouring gasoline on the fire of existing resource pressures. It makes scarcity worse in places already struggling, like arid regions needing water. It messes with weather patterns, hitting agriculture and food security unpredictably everywhere. It can make resources harder to get to because of environmental damage or extreme weather. Rising seas threaten coastlines, displace people, which then increases competition for land and resources somewhere else. It puts immense stress on systems global, regional, that are already struggling with how to share things out.
So this scarcity and the instability climate change adds, it actually makes nations look at each other differently.
Fundamentally differently, yes. When vital resources get scarcer or less predictable, countries tend to turn inward. They start seeing their neighbors less as potential partners for trade, for sharing resources, managing things together, and more as direct rivals for the same shrinking pie. That breeds deep distrust, suspicion, hostility. Border fights over rivers or fertile land can suddenly escalate. Competition for energy or critical minerals spills over into geopolitical tension.
And history seems to back this up, that this is a powerful driver.
It does. The analysis points out that history gives us plenty of evidence. Scarcity of vital resources has often been a more consistent, more reliable predictor of conflict than just differences in ideology or political systems. Ideological battles grab headlines. Sure, they fuel passions, but that quiet, relentless existential pressure of resource scarcity, that has repeatedly pushed nations and groups into conflict. Think about historical fights over trade routes, fertile river valleys, or modern tensions over oil fields, or access to fresh water in dry regions. It's a very pragmatic, often brutal driver of tension. And the suggestion is it's only becoming more relevant because of climate change.
That's a powerful thought, almost chilling, that basic needs can be more destabilizing, predictably, than even deeply held beliefs. Okay, let's move to the third threat, technological disruption. This feels very much of our time, dealing with entirely new ways conflict could happen.
Yeah, this one fundamentally redefines the battlefield. And the nature of war itself, technology isn't just about more powerful bombs. It creates entirely new arenas, entirely new methods for conflict, things that exist alongside traditional fighting or even replace it. We're talking, obviously, about advanced weapons, conventional, maybe unconventional, but also sophisticated cyber warfare, the ability to cripple infrastructure, financial systems, communications without firing a shot.
And information warfare.
And the weaponization of information itself, absolutely. Huge coordinated campaigns of misinformation, disinformation, designed to destabilize societies from the inside, sow chaos, undermine trust in everything.
And a key problem here is that the rules for these new arenas, they're often murky or just don't exist yet.
Exactly. A lot of these new domains, especially cyber and information warfare, they operate in this kind of legal and ethical gray zone. There is a real lack of established international norms, clear treaties, agreed upon rules of engagement. Not like traditional warfare, where there are at least some established conventions, even if they're violated. It feels like a new frontier in many ways, a Wild West where the lines are blurry. And that ambiguity makes conflict using these tools incredibly hard to control, hard to predict, hard to de-escalate, because the basic rules aren't agreed on. If you don't have clear red lines in cyberspace, for instance, the risk of miscalculating is way higher.
Which leads to the really alarming part, the potential for accidents, for escalation happening unintentionally.
This gets highlighted as a particularly serious danger now in this era of technological disruption. In a world so reliant on complex, interconnected digital networks, on automated systems, on super-fast communication, the potential for a technical glitch, a seemingly small hack, misinterpreting data, a mistake by an automated response system, the potential for that to trigger something catastrophic is significantly higher. The risk isn't just deliberate human decisions or human error anymore. It now includes the inherent unpredictability, the fragility, the potential for weird interactions within complex tech systems that operate faster than humans can even track, let alone intervene in.
So like a cyber attack meant to just disrupt a power grid. It could be misread by defense systems as the start of a physical attack, leading to an automated counterattack that nobody actually intended.
Precisely that kind of scenario. Or maybe an AI system designed to spot threats identifies a false positive or misreads complex signals and sets off a chain reaction that spirals out of control before anyone even knows what's happening. The interconnectedness and speed of modern tech means errors, bugs, unexpected interactions can spread rapidly across different domains, cyber, conventional military, potentially leading to massive unintended consequences. The whole risk profile has changed. Technology creates new paths to disaster that don't even need bad intentions at every single step.
Okay, so we've gone through the deep sort of ancient human drives pushing toward conflict, power, fear, identity, survival. And we've looked at three very modern ways those courses could blow up globally. Identity conflicts, resource competition made worse by climate change, and the unpredictable dangers of tech disruption. But the material we've looked at also brings up something maybe even more unsettling. The idea that war, in some strange, brutal ways, has actually served certain paradoxical functions throughout human history. It's not just pure destruction, it's had effects the societies have sometimes somehow used or stumbled into.
It's a dark aspect to confront, definitely challenging. But the historical analysis suggests that conflict, despite its horrific costs, has, in certain situations, had these weird, almost functional roles for human societies, shaping how they developed, how they organized themselves.
Like you mentioned, this idea of a social reset. What does that actually mean here?
Well, for some societies, especially ones dealing with deep internal splits or really entrenched unfairness or just stagnation, war has sometimes acted as this perverse kind of reset button. The sheer pressure and chaos of conflict can shatter old power structures, force a radical rethink of what matters, and basically clear the ground for new social, political, or economic systems to grow out of the ruins. It's not planned, it's not good, but it's a violent, chaotic catalyst that can fundamentally change the social landscape in ways peaceful reform maybe couldn't.
And it can somehow bring groups together,
Yeah.
groups that were fighting internally before.
Yeah, facing a huge external threat during a war can be a powerful, though often temporary, unifier. Different groups within a society may be split by class or region or politics. They can be forced to shelve their own fights and strong, even if short-lived, sense of national identity or shared purpose, overriding divisions that seemed impossible to bridge before the war started.
And, maybe the grimmest one, it's been a huge driver of innovation.
That's a recurring theme, almost cynical when you look back.
Like-
War speeds up innovation dramatically, often just driven by the urgent need for a military edge or just to survive. Technologies developed for war,
Wow.
breakthroughs in metalworking or logistics way back, right up to rocketry, computing, nuclear physics, communications in the 20th century, many of them later found massive civilian uses. Changed the world completely. It's a dark paradox, isn't it? Where immense destruction somehow yields useful knowledge as a byproduct.
And it literally redraws the map.
Fundamentally, major global conflicts have repeatedly reshaped the whole international political order. Empires rise and fall, new countries get created, others disappear, alliances shift, power balances get totally restructured. The borders and political setup we have today, often direct results of past wars.
And there's even an economic angle sometimes mentioned.
Yes, the material notes that complex economic aspect. While the overall long-term economic impact of war is just massively destructive, lives lost, infrastructure gone, resources wasted in the shorter term, mobilizing for war can stimulate certain industries, defense, obviously, and related sectors. It can lead to full employment, ramped up production, rapid tech advances within those specific industries, creating this kind of perverse economic activity that benefits some sectors, even while the wider economy is taking a huge hit.
So when you pull all that together, the social, political, tech, economic effects, there's this stark, brutal logic that the analysis points to.
Right.
The brutal logic is that chilling observation. Conflict has, throughout history, sometimes served as this powerful, tragic tool, forcing fundamental change when peaceful ways, diplomacy, reform, just gradual change have failed or stalled or been deliberately blocked. When societies or the whole international system gets stuck, gridlocked with deep problems, the pressure builds up. Unresolved issues, competing drives. It can reach a point where violent upheaval becomes, in this dark historical view, the only force strong enough to break the deadlock and rearrange things. It's a recurring, deeply unfortunate part of the human story, using destruction as a catalyst when constructive paths seem closed off. But we absolutely have to pivot hard here, because understanding those strange historical functions, it's crucial for analyzing why conflicts happen, why they keep happening, but it does nothing, absolutely nothing, to lessen the immense, overwhelming, undeniable cost of this pattern.
Absolutely not. Acknowledging the historical impact, the functions, that's just analysis, cause and effect. It is never, ever a justification for the suffering. The cost is the primary reality. And it's unimaginable suffering, massive instability, especially for the people caught right in the middle.
For the people on the ground.
Civilians always bear the worst of it, consistently. Women, children, the elderly, entire families, communities. Destroyed, displaced, traumatized, killed. The sheer human costs, lives lost, bodies broken, homes gone, the psychological scars, it's staggering. It leaves wounds that take generations to heal if they ever do. The scale of tragedy is just impossible to fully grasp.
And the effects don't stop at the border, do they? The ripples spread globally, they last for decades.
They cascade right across our interconnected world. The impacts on global economies are huge, messing up supply chains, distorting markets, diverting resources, creating massive financial burdens. Conflicts are a primary driver of forced migration, creating enormous humanitarian crises. Millions forced to flee, straining neighboring countries, global aid systems.
And the environment takes a hit too.
Oh, definitely. Warfare is incredibly destructive environmentally, from the immediate damage bombing, infrastructure destruction, to the long-term legacy of landmines, unexploded bombs, polluted water, the whole environmental footprint of military activity. And, as we touched on, the long-term psychological toll on soldiers, civilians, refugees, from trauma, violence. It's profound. It lasts for decades. Affects individuals, whole societies. The cost is multi-layered, devastating, and goes on long after the fighting stops.
So after exploring the deep drivers of modern threats, even acknowledging those grim historical functions, We're left facing the fundamental, maybe the toughest question of all. Given this history, given these ingrained patterns, can humans actually break this cycle of recurring conflict?
The material is pretty clear that this is an enormous challenge, arguably humanity's greatest. Because like we discussed, those deep drivers, fear, pride, greed, that primal survival instinct, they're profoundly human. They aren't just external forces you can tweak or political systems you can easily redesign. They seem intrinsic to our psychology, our collective behavior.
And technology, globalization, all the things that have changed the world so much.
They haven't erased these core impulses, have they?
Not at all. In many ways, they've just given us new, faster, more destructive tools for those old impulses to play out. Technology offers powerful ways to express fear through surveillance, pride through propaganda, greed through fighting over digital assets, survival through advanced weapons. And globalization means a local conflict sparked by identity or resources can have immediate global consequences, pulling everyone else in. The underlying human stuff remains, but the speed, the scale, the complexity, they're all amplified. So if the problem is rooted this deep in human nature, in history,
Yeah.
just signing more peace treaties isn't going to cut it, is it? Not fundamentally.
The analysis we've seen is very direct about that. Treaties, traditional peace talks, they are absolutely essential tools for managing conflicts right now, stopping violence, negotiating temporary fixes. But they're not enough on their own to break the fundamental cycle. They deal with the symptoms, the immediate flare-ups, but they often don't get down to those deep roots, the underlying drivers, the systemic pressures that make war seem like a viable option, or even an inevitable one, time and time again.
It needs something much bigger, a fundamental shift.
It argues for exactly that, a fundamental shift. Not just in political deals, but in human perspective, and in the very structures and systems societies operate within globally. It's about changing the underlying conditions that make conflict look like a logical or unavoidable path.
What are the key areas where this kind of profound change needs to happen?
3 key areas, really. First, a fundamental shift in how humans see the other. Moving beyond tribalism, beyond defining your group against other groups, towards recognizing shared humanity, interconnectedness. It's not about erasing identity, but about decoupling identity from hostility.
That feels huge, especially when identity is being weaponized so effectively right now.
It is huge. Second, a transformation in how we share and manage vital resources globally. Moving beyond the zero-sum game, my gain is your loss, towards collaborative, fair, sustainable systems for managing things like water, energy, food security. It needs real international cooperation on these as shared problems, things we can only solve together, not fight over.
And dealing with the tech risks.
The third area is transforming how we govern the powerful technologies we create. Developing strong international norms, regulations, ethical frameworks for new tech, especially things like cyber, AI, autonomous weapons, to manage the risks of disruption, miscalculation, accidental war, making sure tech serves human flourishing, not just becomes a more dangerous weapon.
All of this clearly needs cooperation that goes way beyond just narrow national self-interest.
Absolutely. The analysis really hammers home the need for genuine cooperation that transcends those old national boundaries. It calls for fostering a global, systemic view, recognizing we're all deeply interdependent. Problems like climate change, pandemics, economic instability, and yes, the risk of global conflict itself. No single nation can solve them alone. They demand collective action based on realizing we share vulnerabilities and we share a future.
And what are the basic tools? The approach is needed to even try and foster this massive shift in thinking and systems.
The material highlights things like education, dialogue, empathy, and transparency as crucial. Education to build critical thinking, challenge prejudice, foster understanding of different views and shared global problems. Dialogue to create ways to communicate, build bridges, build trust, even between enemies. Empathy, the often underestimated ability to genuinely understand and share someone else's feelings, see the world from their side. That can dissolve us versus them. And transparency, being open about actions and intentions between nations, groups, to reduce suspicion, build confidence, stop the misunderstandings that can spiral into conflict.
It paints a picture of a possible future, doesn't it? A difficult one to reach, but possible, if these shifts could somehow happen.
It does. The suggestion is, look, if humans could genuinely cultivate empathy for each other's fears and hopes, not just grasp them intellectually, but really feel them, and if our systems, internationally, societally, were fundamentally redesigned to reward cooperation, shared security, peace, instead of prioritizing narrow national gain or dominance or short-term profit, then maybe, just maybe, that constant shadow of war could finally start to recede. It's hopeful, yes, but it requires immense conscious effort. Transformation.
But the path forward is described as incredibly tough, not easy.
Far from easy. History is just a brutal teacher on how fragile peace is, how quickly it can fall apart under pressure. We see it again and again. Seemingly stable situations can just deteriorate with terrifying speed when those deep drivers, fear, identity, resource pressure, get stirred up, intensified, or deliberately exploited. Peace structures like international bodies or diplomatic norms can turn out to be very brittle when things get rough.
And bringing it right back to today.
Yeah.
That recent nuclear scare mentioned in the material. It's a terrifying reminder of just how precarious things still are.
It really is. A visceral reminder that despite everything we know, despite the potential consequences, the world is still living on this dangerous razor's edge. The potential for catastrophic conflict, deliberate or accidental, isn't some abstract theory from the past. It's an active, lurking threat, terrifyingly real.
So the ultimate question isn't just analyzing why humans have warred for thousands of years. It's whether humanity can actually evolve beyond this pattern.
Exactly. And the crucial follow-up is, can we make that fundamental evolutionary leap in our collective behavior, in our systems, before the next major crisis hits? Because the stakes now, they're fundamentally higher, terrifyingly higher than almost any time before. Unlike past wars, often fought over borders or resources, the potential stakes today with nuclear weapons, climate collapse, runaway tech risks include the very survival of advanced civilization. Maybe the planet itself. The consequences of getting it wrong are just exponentially greater.
It truly is a complex, often painful, incredibly high-stakes dance humanity's engaged in, always seeming to circle back towards the brink.
It is. But perhaps, and this is a challenging thought, but maybe a necessary one, perhaps the very existence of these terrifying modern threats, identity conflict, fueled by global tensions, resource wars ramped up by environmental collapse, unpredictable tech paths to disaster. Maybe their sheer scale isn't just a sign of inevitable doom. Maybe it's a wake-up call, a call to a different kind of action.
Not a call to just brace for the next inevitable war, but a call to actively, consciously, urgently imagine and build a fundamentally new kind of peace.
Exactly that. A peace that isn't just the absence of fighting, not one based on mutual fear or maintained by a shaky balance of power, but one built on an explicit shared idea of common futures. Recognizing our deep interdependence, our shared vulnerability, based on genuinely recognizing our shared humanity.
And there's that final paradox. The same technology is capable of unimaginable destruction.
Also hold this incredible potential to connect us more deeply than ever, to foster understanding, enable dialogue, share knowledge, enlighten perspectives globally. The internet, global communications, advanced computing, AI, these can be terrifying tools for division, surveillance, war, or they can be powerful engines for collaboration, empathy, building bridges.
It all depends, doesn't it, on whether humans can collectively find the wisdom, the will, the courage to choose to use them for positive, unifying ends instead of destructive, divisive ones.
And that is the critical challenge. Right now, as we watch these complex threats unfold, the focus has to be broader than just managing the latest crisis or avoiding the immediate next war. It's about truly understanding those deep, ancient currents that drive conflict, those powerful, often dark forces of fear, identity, power, survival, and consciously trying, with real urgency, to steer our collective course towards a future where war isn't seen as this inevitable, recurring rhythm, but something actively pushed into the past, a terrible, distant memory.
Because if we fail to change this fundamental pattern, we don't evolve beyond these drives and adapt our systems to the new scale of threats. History's judgment on the next outcome might be far, far less forgiving than it's been before. So the provocative thought to leave you with, after all this, is maybe this. What steps, however small they might seem against these huge global forces, what steps might you take in your own life, your community, through your actions, to actively contribute to building that new kind of peace? Pushing back against the idea that conflict is inevitable and leaning into the possibility of a fundamentally different future.